All right, let's get this straight from the beginning. This is not one of those feel good, sip your coffee and scroll kind of talks. This is the type of story that forces you to sit up, tighten your jaw, and realize that the world you think you understand is far more ruthless, far more calculated, and far more unforgiving than the polite version you see on the news. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about an incident, it's about a mindset. It's about a level of preparation, precision, and quiet dominance that most people don't even know exists. 12. That's the number we start with. 12 elite agents, not rookies, not beginners, not interns fresh out of training. I'm talking about the kind of people who are the sharpest of the sharp. Trained to survive in situations you and I couldn't even imagine. And they weren't sent on a vacation. They weren't here to do charity work. They came with a mission so sensitive, so classified, that even the people sending them knew the stakes. These weren't foot soldiers, these were masters of their craft. But here's where the world starts to tilt. They came to India. And India is not a playground for the uninvited. See, people still underestimate what India has become in 2025. They think it's the same country they read about in old history books, the one that gets lectured by the West, the one that's too developing to play in the big leagues. But what they don't realize is that India has been quietly upgrading everything: its economy, its technology, its military intelligence, not with noise, but with silence. And if you know anything about power, you know the most dangerous moves are the ones made quietly. Those 12 agents, they thought they were entering a game they had already mastered. They thought they'd slip in, do what they came to do, and leave without a trace. But the problem with overconfidence is that it blinds you to how much the other side has changed. They didn't come to the India of 20 years ago. They came to an India that now has eyes in the dark, ears in the wind, and systems in place that can detect the smallest tremor of a foreign move. They came to a nation that has learned to smile at its allies, but never forget that in the world of geopolitics, even your friends are sometimes running their own games. Out of 12, 11 vanished. And when I say vanished, I don't mean they were caught in some clumsy police raid for the cameras. No, that would have been too easy, too noisy. This was done in such a way that even the most experienced intelligence agencies in the world had to sit back and think, what just happened? One day, they were here moving, planning, blending in. The next day, gone. No public arrests, no dramatic rescues, no ransom videos. Just erased from the board. Now let me tell you something: when you operate at that level, disappearing someone without a trace is not about muscle. It's about information. It's about being 10 steps ahead before they even take their first step. It's about controlling not just the battlefield, but the invisible threads that hold the battlefield together. That's what India has learned. That's what makes it terrifying for anyone who tries to play games on its soil. Because you can't beat what you can't even see coming. Think about this: these were agents from one of the most feared and respected intelligence networks on the planet. Their training is legendary. Their operational success rate is something most nations would envy. And yet, in India, 11 of them couldn't even make it past the shadows. That tells you two things. One, the people watching over India are not amateurs, they are among the best in the world. Two, if India can do this to one of its closest partners when it feels something's wrong, imagine what it can do to an enemy. And here's where most people get it twisted. They think this is about aggression, about flexing muscle just for the sake of showing off. No, this is about sending a silent, calculated message. We see everything, we know everything, and we don't need to shout about it. The loudest countries are not the most powerful, they're the most insecure. True power doesn't need to make announcements. True power lets its actions speak. Do you understand how difficult it is to make people disappear without leaving diplomatic fingerprints? In today's hyper-connected, satellite-watched media, hungry world, everything is recorded, leaked, or tweeted. Yet here, nothing, not a single leak that could be verified. That's not luck, that's mastery. That's knowing not just how to operate in the dark, but how to control the dark itself. This incident, as strange and unsettling as it sounds, is a reminder of a brutal truth. In the global arena, there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. There are only permanent interests. And India has finally reached a point where it can protect its interests without asking for permission, without explaining itself, and without worrying about whose feathers get ruffled. That's the difference between being a player in the game and being the one who designs the game. You have to understand that this wasn't just about those agents. This was about every country watching, every intelligence service taking notes, every strategist recalculating their assumptions about what India can and cannot do. And that's where the real victory lies, not in the act itself, but in the psychological ripple it creates, because after something like this, nobody approaches India the same way again. Nobody assumes they can operate here without being noticed. Nobody makes the mistake of thinking they're untouchable. Now, let's pull this back into your own life for a second, because I know some of you are thinking, that's geopolitics, what's it got to do with me? Everything. Because the principle is the same, whether you're running a country or running your own career, your own business, your own life. The moment people realize you're paying attention, that you're prepared, that you've quietly built yourself into someone who cannot be underestimated, the game changes. They stop seeing you as an easy mark. They stop trying to test you, and if they do well, they find out the hard way. Preparation is invisible until it's tested. You don't show your cards to the table unless you're ready to end the game right there. That's what India did. That's what you can do in your own battles. Because if you think the world is going to respect you out of kindness, you're already losing. Respect is earned in silence, and it's confirmed when you prove you can back it up. India didn't call a press conference to brag about this. It didn't put up posters saying, "Look what we did." It just handled business, and the people who needed to understand understood. That's power. That's the kind of power that lasts. And I'll tell you something else. The 12th agent, the one who didn't vanish. You think that's by accident. No, that's strategy. Sometimes you leave one piece on the board, not because you couldn't take it, but because you need that piece to carry a message back to the other side. A warning, a reminder, a quiet statement that says, "We could have taken all of you. Remember that." That's not weakness. That's control. That's playing the long game. So what's the takeaway here? In a world that celebrates noise, master silence. In a time where everyone's showing off, learn to move without being seen. Build yourself in such a way that when people finally realize what you're capable of, it's already too late for them to do anything about it. Because the truth is, whether you're a nation or an individual, the most dangerous force is the one nobody saw coming until it was standing right in front of them. The disappearance of those 11 agents isn't just a mystery. It's a statement that says India is not to be played with, that says the days of underestimating this nation are over, that says if you come here with the wrong intentions, you may never leave. And the brilliance of it all is that this message was delivered without a single speech, without a single public threat, without even raising a voice, just action, pure, decisive, calculated action. That's why this matters. That's why the world is paying attention, even if they pretend they're not. Because they know if this is what India can do in silence, imagine what it could do if it decided to make noise. And when you understand that level of quiet confidence, you stop needing to prove yourself every 5 minutes. You just move, and the world adjusts around you. This is the kind of mindset you need to survive, to grow, to win in whatever field you're in. Don't tell them everything, Don't show them everything, just be ready, and when the moment comes, handle it so completely that they never forget you were there. That's how legends are built. That's how nations rise. And that's how one story about 12 agents who came to India and never left the same way becomes a symbol of something much bigger. Because in the end, it's not the loudest player who wins. It's the one who knows exactly when to strike and exactly how to disappear when the job is done. And when you've mastered that, there's no board in the world you can't control. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. This was not simply about the disappearance of 11 highly trained operatives from one of the most capable intelligence agencies in the world. It was about what that disappearance represented. Until that point, the perception of India on the global stage, even among its allies, carried a certain underestimation. The world knew India as a country with great potential, a rising economic force, a nation with a formidable military on paper and a growing technological footprint. But in the realm of covert power projection, the silent, invisible games of intelligence and psychological warfare, India was rarely seen as a dominant player. That single incident shifted the axis of that perception in a way that would ripple through the corridors of power in Washington, Tel Aviv, Moscow, Beijing, and every other capital that thought they had measured India's reach before this incident. Military doctrine in India had been evolving, yes, but still within certain boundaries dictated by a historical tendency toward restraint. India's approach to foreign intelligence threats had often been about containment, exposure, and diplomacy, rarely about deep, surgical, untraceable action. This was the moment that restraint was recalibrated into calculated assertiveness. It was not aggression for the sake of aggression. It was a demonstration that India now had both the capability and the will to act decisively when the stakes were high enough. And that action would not be noisy, it would not be telegraphed, it would not be for public applause. It would be precise, innovative, and complete. For decades, military doctrines worldwide have been shaped by the doctrines of great powers, the Cold War giants who established the rules of engagement in the shadows. India had been largely on the defensive side of that system. But this incident announced, without words, that it had quietly developed its own rules and was ready to play by them. The innovation behind it was not in a single piece of technology or a single elite team. It was in the integration of multiple layers of capability: signals intelligence, human intelligence, cyber surveillance, counterintelligence analysis, and rapid response field operations, all working together seamlessly. The world is used to hearing about these capabilities in isolation, but rarely do they come together in such a synchronized, invisible strike. This level of coordination hinted at years of quiet preparation, the kind of cross-agency integration that only happens when a country decides it will no longer play catch-up but will set the pace. It was a signal that the Made in India innovation mindset had now fully penetrated national defense strategy. The disappearance of those operatives was not just a tactical win, it was a psychological one. For global powers accustomed to thinking of India as a reliable but somewhat predictable partner, this was a shock to the system. They had underestimated not just the technology, but the strategic depth behind it. Because to make something like this happen, to remove 11 trained operatives from a mission without any detectable trail, requires more than good technology or elite personnel. It requires an understanding of your adversary so intimate that you can anticipate their moves before they make them. It requires a playbook that is tailored not to generic threats, but to specific patterns of behavior, specific cultural and operational tendencies of the adversary. That level of insight doesn't come from chance. It comes from years of focused study, patient intelligence gathering, and an unblinking commitment to staying ahead. This was the moment when the world began reassessing India not just as a rising economy or a growing military power, but as a silent force in the intelligence world, one capable of executing complex, high-stakes operations that could rival, and in this case surpass, those of countries considered at the top of the field. Even close allies had to ask themselves uncomfortable questions. If India could do this to one of their most elite teams, what could it do to others? What did India know about their own operations? How much of what they assumed was hidden had already been quietly mapped, analyzed, and filed away in some secure Indian intelligence database? It also sent a message to India's adversaries, though they likely understood it even more clearly than its allies. For them, this was not just a warning. It was a revelation of a capability they may have suspected but never confirmed. In the delicate balance of power in South Asia, where every move is scrutinized and every shift in capability can trigger counter moves, this single event forced a recalibration. Intelligence agencies that had considered India's domestic counterintelligence to be strong but limited in its reach now had to factor in the possibility that their own foreign networks operating in or around India were vulnerable in ways they had not imagined. And because the operation left no evidence, no trace, no public narrative to spin, there was no way to counter the fear it created. You cannot defend against what you cannot define. At the heart of this turning point was the understanding that intelligence dominance is not about collecting the most data or having the largest network of spies. It is about controlling the flow of information, about dictating who knows what, when, and how. India had just demonstrated that it could not only intercept and monitor the actions of foreign agents, but that it could manage the entire information environment surrounding those actions. This meant that even in a worst-case scenario for the foreign operatives, their home country could not publicly accuse India without exposing their own operations. That is the highest level of strategic advantage, when you can act decisively and your adversary is unable to respond without damaging themselves in military terms. This incident became a case study in full-spectrum dominance, not just in conventional force projection, but in the invisible domain where perception shapes reality, and perception, in global power politics, can be as decisive as any battlefield victory. When the world believes you can act with such precision and invisibility, they begin to factor that belief into every negotiation, every alliance, every confrontation. That's when you stop reacting to the moves of others and start shaping the moves they make. India had, in one stroke, moved into that position. It also redefined the role of innovation in India's military doctrine. For years, India had been pushing its domestic defense industry to reduce dependency on foreign suppliers, to develop indigenous solutions that could be tailored to its specific needs. This incident showed the world the fruits of that approach. The tools and methods used were not borrowed wholesale from some foreign ally's playbook. They were adapted, customized, and in some cases entirely developed within India. This is why the operation was so difficult to anticipate or counter, because it was uniquely Indian in design, rooted in local realities and operational thinking, but executed at a standard that matched or exceeded the best in the world. It was the embodiment of the principle that innovation is not just about creating new things, but about integrating them in ways others have not thought of, and so, the turning point was not just in capability, but in perception. In the months that followed, military analysts across the globe began quietly updating their assessments of India's intelligence reach. Think tanks rewrote sections of their reports. Security alliances reconsidered the flow of sensitive information. Regional adversaries adjusted their counterintelligence budgets. Even economic and trade negotiations took on a different tone, Because in the complex web of international relations, economic leverage and intelligence capability often walk hand in hand. When you know more than the other side expects you to, you can negotiate from a position they didn't think you had. The global powers, for their part, had to face a simple but unsettling truth. India had crossed an invisible line. It had gone from being a strong regional player to being an unpredictable, innovative actor on the world stage. And in the game of intelligence dominance, unpredictability is a weapon. The fact that no one could say exactly how India had pulled this off, and that India itself offered no public explanation, only amplified the effect. The unknown became a deterrent in itself. And when your adversaries and even your allies start planning around what you might be capable of, you have already won half the battle. This was the deeper meaning behind that silent operation. It was not simply about removing a threat. It was about introducing a new factor into the global equation, the knowledge that India could and would act in ways that others could neither predict nor publicly counter. That knowledge changes behavior. It changes strategies. It changes the way every other player in the game calculates risk. And once that shift happens, it is nearly impossible to reverse. The birth of an assertive military doctrine, backed by innovation, is not marked by a parade, a speech, or a treaty. It is marked by the moment the rest of the world realizes, without you having to tell them, that the rules have changed. That moment had arrived for India. And from that point on, every major power knew they had to account for it in everything they did involving this nation that had just shown it could play the silent game better than almost anyone else in the world.